Religion is a mind virus. She got religion and started paying her taxes. Theravada Buddhism is the primary religion of Burma and Thailand. Christianity is a relationship, not a religion. He follows the Dallas Cowboys religiously. What is religion? Is it a belief in God or the gods? A source of endless human conflict and repression. An institution, on the contrary, that raised the human race up from the level of chimpanzees. Is it what people do instead of developing a personal relationship with the divine? I'm Dr. David Marshall, and this is Wind of the Tao podcast. I made the silly mistake of spending decades researching a topic that everyone's already an expert on. Just ask them. Imagine being a scholar of coffee or football. Before you open your mouth, everyone knows the answer already. Starbucks is awful. The LA Rams will win the Super Bowl in 2027. I hope not. Home ground is the way to go. That's my wife talking. Sugar and cream and the Chicago Bears are heresies, punishable by 3 nights in the stocks. It's the same way with religion. Everyone knows everything already and will offer their opinion at the drop of a hat. Whatever religion is, it seems to matter a lot to a lot of people, whether because they hate it, they love some version of it, or find the questions it raises endlessly fascinating. Even if you ask the experts, they all have opinions about what religion really is, and they all seem to disagree. Let's look at about a dozen of those professional definitions by scholars of religion and other people who think they are, before we pick our own path through the debris of this definitional Armageddon. Edward Tyler, one of the founders of anthropology, who taught at Oxford University. He also brought this totem pole from Vancouver Island to Pitts River Museum in Oxford, where I think you can probably still see it. He said, a minimum definition of religion is the belief in spiritual being. Pascal Boyer agreed. Religion is about the existence and causal powers of non-observable entities and agencies. So apparently a spiritual being is non-observable. And unfortunately, that sounds a little bit like modern physics, because modern physics also talks a lot about non-observable entities and agencies. But Paul Johnson said about Vladimir Lenin, who did not believe in God or the gods, no man better personifies the replacement of the religious impulse by the will to power. With his extraordinary passion for force, he might have figured in Muhammad's legions. He was even closer, perhaps, to John Calvin, with his belief in organizational structure, his ability to create one, and then dominate it utterly, his Puritanism, his passionate self-righteousness, and above all, his intolerance. Well, this makes it sound like Paul Johnson has a very gloomy, negative understanding of what religion is. And Vladimir Lenin fits in there very nicely. Rodney Stark and Roger Finke. Religion is concerned with the supernatural. Religion consists of very general explanations of existence, including the terms of exchange with God or gods. When I interviewed Dr. Stark, I challenged him on this because it seems to me that this definition seems a little bit narrow. So I asked him a few questions. Marshall, you define religion as explanations of the meaning of existence based on supernatural assumptions and including statements about the nature of the supernatural. Some people would define religion in what they might see as a more neutral way, as an ultimate concern, as Paul Tillich put it. We'll have Paul Tillich's opinion up in a minute. Stark, Paul Tillich didn't have a religion. Marshall, one thing I like about Tillich's definition is you have a movement like Marxism-Leninism, which a lot of people say looks like a lot like a religion in many ways. Isn't it better to have a more neutral definition that would include political ideologies like that? Stark, to the contrary, I think confusing the two greatly hinders analysis. Let me explain why. I think you can have secular movements that have some of these characteristics, like high levels of commitment, true believerism, that sort of thing. But there's an enormous difference between systems of thought that are openly predicated on the existence of the supernatural and those that are purely worldly. For example, the purely worldly ones are subject to failing all the time. The supernatural ones don't need to. Marshall, sociologically, in terms of how they operate in society, it seems there are many similarities. Stark, Well, there are similarities, but I think that the important one is, why do utopias always fail? That is to say, the non-religious ones, Marshall. It's been 150 years, and there's still some pretty radical Marxists out there. Stark. Oh, no, 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 no. Start a utopian community, okay? We're going to go out there and we're going to have this commune, and we're going to do, whatever. The problem is they've got to succeed here and now in making the wonderful thing happen. And they can't. But if it isn't going to happen until the next life, then you can. So religious communes are vastly more durable. God knows whether there are any serious communists in Russia at some point, except for ignorant people. They were mostly in Western universities. I can't imagine that the intellectual elites in Russia really were communist after some point, because it wasn't working and everyone could see, Marshall. But isn't it your point when you talk about temple religions in discovering God, that the elite priests didn't really believe in it either? Stark. They may not have, and for good reason. They had God right there in the building with them, instead of in heaven where he belongs. Marshall, I'm sure Stalin didn't bear much scrutiny up close either. Stark. No, I'm sure he didn't. But I think it's very important to not confuse the two. I mean, yes, there are enormous similarities, but I think the differences are absolutely critical. The ability to sanction morals and put the payoff in another life, I think, is vastly more durable and less likely to lead us to tyranny. That is Rodney Stark's opinion. But Emil Durkheim described religion as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. Then he added, religion is broader than the idea of gods or spirits, and so cannot be defined exclusively in those. It is a more or less complex system of myths, dogmas, rites, and ceremonies. William James seemed to sort of agree with him. The feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. Now, what is that, whatever they consider the divine? Well, James added, we must interpret the term divine very broadly, as denoting any object that is God-like, whether it be a concrete deity or not. The most fervent opponents of Christian doctrine have often enough shown a temper which, psychologically considered, is indistinguishable from religious zeal. So this is very similar to Paul Johnson's observation. John Hick, my own position is more radical. It is also more comprehensive in that it takes full account of the non-theistic as well as the theistic forms of religion. Now, Hick saw the world of religions something like this. In the center, there is the sun, which originally he described as God. And around God, and later on he used the word the real instead, circled a number of planets, which represent the different religions of man. And each one of them receives light from God, from the real. Why did he change the term from God to the real? It came to evolve in a more pluralistic direction. And so he adopted this word, the real, which he thought embraced more religions than the term God would. Paul Tillich, whom I asked Dr. Stark about. Religion is the dimension of depth in all of its functions. Ultimate seriousness, or the state of being ultimately concerned, is itself religious. Whatever you care about the most deeply, whatever gets you up in the morning, whatever you live for, that is your religion. This is a way of using the word religion that's also rather common in popular discourse. Follows the Dallas Cowboys religiously in our original example. Houston Smith, wherever religion comes to life, it displays a startling quality. It takes over. All else, while not silenced, becomes subdued and thrown in without contest into a supporting role. So again, what you really care about, what's most important to you, is your religion. Mircea Eliade and Robert Caillois. At bottom, the only helpful thing one can say of the sacred in general is that it is the opposite of the profane, anything which manifests the sacred. So here you're assuming that there's two levels of reality. There's the profane, ordinary, secular life, and the sacred, something very special and different in some way. Michael Burleigh, another historian, by the end of the century, when God was invoked by all sides in a catastrophic world war, the strange gods of Bolshevism, fascism, and Nazism were already discernible as alternative objects of religious devotion, those political religions being the critical focus of this book. Political religions, strange gods. Some scholars would say that people like Adolf Hitler and Nazism were influenced. What complicates this distinction is that, as some scholars point out, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi movement were influenced by various strands of what even Rodney Stark would call religion. Some scholars write about the occult influence on Hitler. The Nazis were also very interested in some strands of the Christian tradition, definitely in Islam, Tibetan Buddhism, the samurai religion of the Japanese. However, other scholars would argue that Hitler maybe didn't really believe in a God in a transcendent sense at all, that his God was pantheistic and part of nature and very closely tied to survival of the fittest. Richard Dawkins, finally. The whole point of religious faith, its strength and its chief glory, is that it does not depend on rational justification. Now, Dawkins was the author of The God Delusion, an atheist and an evolutionary biologist. I wrote a book in response to Dawkins called The Truth Behind the New Atheism, which he described as a flea biting the dog that was the God delusion. Now, Dawkins' definition of religion is also tied to its purpose. Its chief glory is that it doesn't depend on rational justification, he says. And of course, I debunked that argument in The Truth Behind the New Atheism. The word glory here is used in a sarcastic sense. Dawkins obviously despises the fact that religion supposedly does not appeal to reason and evidence, and he thinks that's the chief difference between science and religion. So he's kind of operating in a two-level reality as well. Okay, how do we bring it all together? The sociologist Peter Berger described two kinds of definitions of religion. Some of them are functional. In other words, they focus on the purpose which religion serves, either in the mind of the individual or in society, as what he calls a kind of sacred canopy over society. The foundation, to use a different metaphor, the foundation of society is some sort of ultimate belief. So religion can serve that purpose, as Durkheim understood. Religion can serve that purpose for the collective, and it can also serve that purpose for the individual, as William James understood it. On the other hand, religion can also be defined substantively, according to the content of belief, the God or the gods, the Tao, the Buddha, Rama. So, does this mug of water qualify for your definition of religion? Or maybe your cat? A crocodile? One can say that anything can be a religion in two senses, one of them rather trivial and the other one a little bit more important. First of all, it's a free country. You can use any sound to represent any object you like. Like J.R.R. Tolkien, you too are free to invent a private language. More substantially, if we go by Paul Tillich and others who use functional definitions of religion, whatever you put on your highest altar is your religion. It is your ultimate concern. While substantive definitions are more popular in ordinary discourse, and I am disagreeing with Rodney Stark, who was always kind to me, defining religion by the substance or content of belief is, I think, problematic in two ways. First, religion is often used to distinguish between two kinds of people or two sorts of belief, as Dawkins obviously did. It's often pejorative, as several of these scholars use it. But there is no neat division between human beings and how we access and understand the world. And by the way, Dr. Stark, some religions can be very, very oppressive as well. Are religious people gullible? Yes. So are atheists. Do you want 1,000 examples or 1,000,000? Do religious people worship authority? Sure. And have you seen how dialectical materialists treated Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot and Kim Il-sung, and how objectivists treat Ayn Rand? Are religious claims not scientific? Most are not, but neither are most claims in general, because science is a very limited epistemology. So the insults of the new atheists simply describe how human minds often work, their own emphatically included. Second, are the gods of a polytheistic religion really outside our world? Do they really transcend nature? The Marvel Universe includes gods like Tony Stark and Thor. Technological and divine powers blend seamlessly in that world and in much of science fiction going back many ages. In China, my students recommended a book called Wandering Earth, which I really enjoyed. And one of the stories of Wandering Earth, by the author of The Three-Body Problem, there is a story about human beings attempting a very difficult physics experiment. And just before human beings are about to attempt this very difficult physics experiment, an alien arrives from an advanced planet and puts a halt to it. He pulls the rug out from underneath the experiment. He explains that if this experiment were to go for the fabric of space and time would rip apart, spreading out at the speed of light until it would envelop the entire galaxy, if not the entire universe. So, as is commonly said, advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. What is sacred and what is profane, anyway? William James is right. We can interpret these terms very broadly. As the Bible puts it, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If that's true, then every object in this world and in every other world is sacred in the sense that God created it. This is the difference between miracles and magic. Miracles point to an outside agent. They reveal the work of the creator of nature and therefore follow rules analogous to natural law, as you see in the Gospels. Magic has no necessary moral component any more than technology, which is why you see in apocryphal stories about Jesus. Do gods exist? Do aliens? These are empirical questions, but that doesn't mean they're falsifiable. You can travel the solar system and the known universe as much as the speed of light will allow you to, and look under every single rock and not find a god or an alien, and you still can't say that these things don't exist. But if you meet one, if you meet the goddess Athena or Kali or whatever, then maybe you can say that I have reason to believe that this being exists. So these kinds of questions can be verifiable, but they're not necessarily falsifiable. In addition, Bob Dylan said, it might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. So I prefer to use Tillich's expansive definition, which puts humans in a single category and begs no questions between them. We all serve somebody. We all have a religion in the sense of an ultimate concern. In another sense, though, atheists are more in agreement with the practitioners of voodoo than either is with Christians. Polytheists tend to see the gods as powerful Marvel comic characters who nonetheless are subject to forces, are locally present, and contingent for their existence on something that is prior to them, however vaguely understood. Call them powerful aliens, the Matrix, in which Buddhist magic is explained scientifically. And you still just have one level of reality. Why not describe that as a religion or set of religions? It would be a mockery of language to say sincere worshippers of Guanyin, Athena, or even Buddha, Brahma, or the Tao are not religious because they perceive these beings as operating within the same cosmos as themselves. So, what is religion? I prefer to think of it as your ultimate concern. In any case, we shouldn't use religion as a stick with which to beat our opponents, as if they were some completely different sort of being as ourselves. And also, we should make it clear what we mean by the word and avoid equivocation and confusion. This is David Marshall at Wind of the Tao Podcast. Thanks for listening.